Hello, Chief.
Hello.
Yeah.
You must be the head of the repair gang.
Yes, my name is George. I'm foreman, police operative.
How many more men is there?
3 more.
3 more men. Okay, we go and see the chief officer.
The supervisor in charge of the shore repair gang met the chief engineer. They went to the cargo control room to see the chief mate. Together, they briefed the gang on safety before the permits to work were filled in. The chief checked that everybody understood the safety regulations on board. He stressed that there was a risk of gas seepage and explosion when the tanks were open. For that reason, it was vital that they check the atmosphere for explosive vapour at regular intervals, as the permit to work stipulated.
Here are the copies of all the permits to work.
The inquiry were able to study all the permits to work issued that morning. A restricted area permit to cover hot work with spark potential, an entry into enclosed space permit, and an electrical work permit. Naturally, the permits specified details of work to be carried out, location, nature of work, hazard identification, which in this case identified the possibility of an explosive atmosphere being present anywhere in the ship, procedures to mitigate risks, given as continuous monitoring of the atmosphere, the date, the time of issue, estimated duration, and the time of cancellation. All the questions were answered and all entries were initialed by the superintendent, and at the end of the form are the signatures of the master, the chief, and the supervisor. Meanwhile, when the third engineer tried to transfer bunkers, he found the transfer pump was faulty.
Chief, come in, Ram here.
What's wrong?
Chief, the transfer pump is not pumping, Chief.
Is the pump running?
The running light is on, Chief.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean the pump is running. Could be an electrical problem.
As the chief engineer saw it, the fault could have been caused by a blocked suction valve, or it could have been due to an electrical fault, such as single phasing. To investigate these possibilities would require an entry into enclosed space permit and an electrical work permit.
We get an enclosed space work permit sort of, because that suction valve is in the cofferdam.
At this point, the chief engineer had to accompany the mate as they took the gang on deck and checked that all the gear needed for the job was in place. The records show that the work on deck started at just after 11 a.m. The chief suggested delaying the gang for a while and compensating for this by requesting staggered meal breaks. In this way, the second could have helped him with the transfer pump, but the job in hand was too demanding to manage without him. They did agree to stagger the lunch break for the gang, however. The chief engineer's report also shows that the breakdown of the transfer pump caused him several additional problems, as he had to delay the bunkering scheduled for later that day. With the second engineer needed on deck, only the third was available to help. To have put the second on the job as well would have meant delaying the shore gang on deck. The question arose as to whether this entry should be made after prior ventilation and without breathing apparatus, or, in view of the urgency of the situation, using a breathing apparatus set and the full safety procedure, as in an emergency. The master refused permission for this, as all operational entries must now be made only after the atmosphere inside the enclosed space has been checked as safe and gas-free. A breathing apparatus set can be worn as a backup only, and a personal gas detector must be taken inside for checking the atmosphere periodically. The statements show that the entry took place just before 12 noon. At the same time, on deck, the repair gang split into 2 groups to stagger their lunch break. One group stopped for lunch. Shortly after midday, at 12:20 precisely, according to the time that the entry permit was cancelled, the third engineer finished his checks in the cofferdam. He then called the chief on the radio to advise him that the valve was okay.
Okay, Ram, I'm busy filling the electrical work permit at the moment. Come up and sign it, please.
Okay, Chief, I'm coming up to your cabin.
Okay, cheers.
Following this, he went to the chief's office to sign and collect his permit to work on electrical circuits for the main board and for the electric motor driving the transfer pump. Both the chief and the third then went to the mess for lunch. Well, so far the situation seems clear. The deck work was in hand and the fault with the pump was clearly not due to a valve problem. But that break for lunch sowed the seeds of confusion for what was to come.
Section filter just last week we are doing.
What pump is this? Transfer pump?
This one.
The second engineer's statement clearly refers to a conversation he had with the chief and the third in the mess. He promised, as he put it, to look at a possible problem which occurred some while back. He then went down to the control room to check it out. The second stated that he went to the control room straight away, got his helmet and tools, was unable to find the safety sign, but nevertheless isolated the feed to the pump motor and went down to check the termination. It was all right. He returned to the control room at about 1:15. Now remember that time. And he then reconnected the motor feed. He also left a note on the switchgear for the third that he'd checked the motor termination and found it okay. The third engineer stated that having finished his lunch, he went to the control room at 1:15. Now, seeing that the isolator switch was on, he assumed either that the second was not dealing with the problem or that he'd finished his investigations. He then isolated the motor, hung the safety sign on the switch, and went down to look at the motor. He tested the terminals for voltage and confirmed that they were dead. But when he began working with them, they were live.
Gentlemen, in conclusion, have you any thoughts or observations for summing up?
Mr. Chairman, there does appear to be some conflict between the third engineer's statement of fact and the second engineer's statement of fact. The third engineer clearly states that he went down and isolated the main feed on the board and placed the safety warning sign on the switch. Yeah. Now, clearly the second engineer who went down there on the first occasion wasn't able to find the warning notice.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, this is a grey area. This is what we have to find out. What happened, and indeed, was there a notice there? This is what we've got to find out.
Yes.
And I think we won't find out the full facts until the third engineer is a little bit more recovered.
That's right.
As the statements show, a serious explosion took place in which the third engineer was badly
Well, I
injured.
think we need to ask
The inquiry was particularly concerned to find out if there are any weaknesses in the permit to work system, because the company operates a number of different types of ship, all using the same system.
Mr. Chairman, do we know, or could we check if there was a separate permit issued to the second engineer?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, can I answer that? No, that there wasn't a permit issued, because his involvement was unexpected and his offer for help was purely casual.
The inquiry concluded that the role of the second engineer was the crucial issue. What he did is clear, but there's conflicting evidence as to when he was doing it, except that it was done after lunch. What is clear is that the third had isolated the feed to the motor. When he got to the motor and tested the terminal, they were dead. And yet, when he began working with them, they were live. This was because both he and the second were working on the same problem at the same time. The conversation in the canteen confused the issue of where the responsibility lay for dealing with this particular problem, and so the permit to work system failed because it was not followed properly. The chief shouldn't have allowed his second to work on the motor without a separate permit. His intervention, however well-meaning, was outside the permit to work system, which was operated on board ship. The inquiry is still investigating the reason for the build-up of flammable vapour, which compounded the incident. But one thing is clear: no job is so urgent or so important that it has to be done outside the permit to work system. This rule must be observed every time and on board every ship operated by the group. And as the International Safety Management Code is applied throughout the shipping industry worldwide, then the permit to work.
I know you told your friend you're not okay. And tell me what's wrong and why you never said you felt that way.
I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up and make a statement. I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up and make a statement.
Everything I do so instinctive and so passionate. Every word I move so descriptive like an adjective. I got a vendetta against every time I wake up feeling negative. When you shake the gates, going